Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, and I have not yet begun taking issue with Batman Eternal. Jim Gordon seemed to have caused a subway accident that resulted in many unfortunate deaths, and while he pointed out a big piece of evidence that would point to his innocence, we're going to ignore that. Because reasons! Meanwhile, we were reintroduced to Stephanie Brown, and I'm sure that this reinvention won't be a steaming pile like all the other New 52 reinventions.
Issue 4, John Layman on script, begins with Batgirl pummeling some criminals who are probably confused when she says things like "no" and "not right" as she makes them mouth bleed. They don't realize she's recalling her father's bail hearing, where the judge notes that 162 people were killed and billions in damage were caused because of Gordon's negligence. Adding to the fact he's allied himself with vigilantes, the judge denies bail and remands him to Blackgate until his manslaughter trial. Barbara defends her father as one of the best cops in Gotham, insisting the perp was armed. Jim calms her down and reiterates that he's no longer sure Grady was armed in the first place.
Thought I was kidding about that whole never bring up the electrical box thing again, didn't you? Well, I wasn't.
In the present, Batman's arrived to calm Batgirl and gets 2 out of 3 punches in the face for his trouble. Turns out Batgirl was knocking around some of Professor Pig's goons and notes the not-so-good sign that her father is questioning his sanity, but both Bats are determined not to let him break. Elsewhere, Steph is at a public phone, finally reaching her mom and revealing a snippet of the dangers her dad and his allies have planned, though Mama Brown doesn't seem convinced. Steph says he's going by Cluemaster, as if this would be news to her mom, and says that she can't go to the police, though stopping before saying exactly why. She tells her mom where she is, that her cell could be tracked, and that she can't stay in one place for too long. Her mom says she'll be there shortly, and Steph hangs up and walks away. Ex-Mrs. Brown turns on the TV, on which Cluemaster appears, and tells him he has a problem. Either Crystal Brown is somehow complicit in all this, or Gotham cable plans are really freaking weird. At the GCPD, Forbes checks in on how Bard is settling. Awful nice of an obvious jerk. Bard says he's been pretty welcomed by everyone, and that he's eager to get to the streets. Guess all that animosity for arresting Gordon just up and conveniently disappeared. As someone in the background scrapes Gordon's name off the commissioner's door, Bard notes that he thought Gordon would be mentoring him, at which point Forbes reminds everyone why he didn't like Jim to begin with. Cutting corners, breaking laws, and that sort of thing.
You know, I know we as readers have special knowledge that other characters in the story don't, but give me a break. Forbes would be more subtle if he just took to uttering evil every so often.
Forbes steers the conversation to police work, mentioning that Pig's men were brought in, but Forbes is only cool with that until he realizes it was done by vigilantes. He shoots down Bard's suggestion of a task force to quell the impending gang war some officers are hearing about, and basically tells him to focus on bringing down the Bat.
Bring me the head of Batman. I don't have any ulterior motives. Who says I'm in Falcone's pocket? I'm not part of some conspiracy. Gordon sucks. Evil.
Speaking of pointy ears, he's crashing through windows and into spines at Falcone's penthouse to ask about Derek Grady. Falcone, doing the gentleman act you see some criminals use in TV and movies, doesn't recall, naturally. Extra naturally, Batman doesn't believe that. Falcone criticizes what Gotham has become under the Bat, and along with some unfinished business he wants to deal with, apparently relating to his facial scars, he wants an orderly, efficient city. Batman wants to help keep the peace. He should get a handle on Penguin. Bats leaves, saying he's watching Falcone.
Hopefully he doesn't notice when I stop watching for a couple of hours tonight. I need my Hulu time.
Returning to the Batcave, Bruce is surprised that Barbara is working instead of resting. Maybe now he has an idea of how Alfred feels. Babs constructed a hollow replica of the train station surveillance footage, discovering one patron who had loitered there for 3 hours, never got on a train or talked to anyone, but left the minute the trains collided. This is the man responsible, she believes. While Bats thinks she's rushing to a guilty verdict, she gets a match. Brazilian soap actor Gonzalo Dominguez, suspected by Interpol of having drug cartel connections, and Babs leaves to clear her father in spite of Bruce's skepticism. Meanwhile, Jim Gordon arrives at Blackgate, greeted by Warden Agatha Zorbatos, who casually mentions the ex-commish discharged her from the GCPD.
Well, in fairness, your surname is a bit supervillainy, and maybe it's a little bit the eye patch. Although points for rocking the skunk stripe.
Escorted through the prison, Gordon, of course, gets recognized by some crooks he's put away. When in his cell, his bunkmate Leo introduces himself and says that, well, being a cop in prison, he probably won't last very long.
It's the New 52. Everyone wants to kill everyone.
Issue 5, scripted by James Tynion IV, begins with Red Robin studying a hologram of one of 7 hospitalized children from Professor Pig's attack 3 nights prior, same night as the train crash. Bruce apparently doesn't like Tim having his personal nests in the city, but Red Robin thinks that's because he keeps his network separate from the Batcave, so bats can't look over his shoulder.
You can just feel the historic and trusting bond between Tim and Bruce, can't you?
Bats has overlooked a strange fact about the sick children. They were showing flu-like symptoms days before their visit to the museum, meaning Pig could not have infected them. While he doesn't know for sure how they were infected or by whom, Tim is certain it points to one place, the Philip Kane Memorial Projects in the heart of the Narrows. Incidentally, that's just where we're taken, specifically to the apartment of Harper and Cullen Rowe. Harper plans on going out even if her little brother has the flu. With the streets getting worse, Cullen is concerned for his sister's safety, but Harper says that's precisely the reason she has to go. She's going to be needed out there. Cullen wants her to promise to observe and not get involved, and that's when we cut to the Gotham Gazette. Anyway, Vicky Vale is waxing nostalgic about the paper before her editor ran it into the ground. We're then introduced to Joey Day, a young man whom Vicky sees as the enemy, and Warren Spacey views as an opportunity for more exposition. He mentions how he used to break stories, but now only writes villain retrospectives. Seriously though, it's both good and bad that we have these reminders, as the series already jumps around so much to so many characters, it can be hard to remember the names in the off chance they'll become important. If they are, it's good. If clunky. If not, it's a waste of the reader's time. When Joey mentions a blurb he wrote on Deacon Blackfire's death at the hands of his own cultists, Vicky lashes out further. Instead of getting hired out of college and fighting to get the stories out as she did, the high school-aged interns can turn in error-filled pieces they wrote in an afternoon.
Between lamenting an arrogant, incompetent editor who's reducing a once strong publication to a shadow of its former self, and commenting on young upstart writers that don't do nearly the kind of heavy or quality work of their predecessors, I'm wondering how self-aware this comic is.
Joey steps away to do intern stuff, and Warren says Vicky was being too harsh, but Vicky thinks Warren should be more angry, since the best crime writer in the city isn't allowed to do his job. She suspects he's got a lead, and when Warren asks what she's working on, she replies it's a lot of nothing new on Gordon. He hands her a folder labeled Felt Cone, and says to start in the Narrows, where the gang war is likely to hit hardest. When Vicky asks what he means, he tells her to get her own sources, failing to make a dinosaur into birds metaphor.
Good idea, Warren. Don't at all elaborate with information that could save the life of anyone you're sending into an impoverished location you just said would be the hardest hit by a conflict they just admitted they don't know anything about. Journalism!
He also suggests taking Joey along, maybe trick him into learning something.
Tricking worked for me. Someone on my left side tapped my right shoulder, and when I turned to the right, I suddenly was an expert in calculus.
Red Robin is observing a child sleeping with his eyes open when Batman appears. That kid would be so excited to have 2 superheroes visiting him if he were awake and this weren't the New 52. Anyway, Bruce asks what he's discovered, but Tim replies that he's got it under control. Bats wants them to work together, but his teenage associate sardonically replies how well that worked out for the quote-unquote dead Nightwing.
Oh, right. I forgot. New 52 Tim Drake is an arrogant twit. Just 'cause Flashpoint had to make everything better, didn't it?
After a moment of insulted silence, Batman notes that the child wasn't at the museum. Red Robin says that it wasn't Professor Pig's Dollotron formula that did this, but something local. What happened to the 7 other children mentioned earlier was likely that Pig's twisted concoctions prematurely triggered something. Nanobot swarms. Batman notes that they're not alien, but more advanced than anything he's seen, or that Pig is capable of. Red Robin asks if Batman recognizes anything about the swarm. I thought you wanted to work together, Batman and Red Robin, just like the old days.
Yeah, by good old days, he must be talking about times before Flashpoint, because we don't really have much of a frame of reference for Tim and Bruce as a duo. And speaking of which, we don't really get much in the way of an update on the kids Gordon was defending. I mean, holograms and exposition have their place, but it doesn't quite give us the kind of impact their supposedly serious condition should give us.
Batman is alerted to more attacks on Penguin's weapons caches, and with no sign of the police, he has to go. Red Robin wants him to just leave already, noting their team isn't what it used to be. Something is broken beneath the surface. Batman says it isn't about that, it's about the city. Exactly.
I don't know about you all, but something about this tension feels kind of forced. Don't get me wrong, it would be understandable for there to be animosity given the events of Death of the Family, but I don't feel like Tim comes off as anything more than a pompous jerk. It'd be one thing if he thought he should tackle the nanobite situation while Batman handles the growing gang war until such time they can pool their knowledge. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels more like Tim is working on hurt feelings regardless of how it might affect working towards the greater good. Between this and issue 2 showing he managed a way of contacting the cave without being recognized, he's clearly trying to distance himself from bats. Here it feels very, very teenager, angsty, bratty teenager. Pre-52 Tim had his troubles with Bruce, but he also possessed a sense of priorities and responsibility that right now New 52 Tim seems to lack. Maybe I need to reread Death of the Family, but I don't think I should have to.
Vicky and Joey have arrived in the Narrows, the intern being a bit intimidated. Vale essentially tells him that being a reporter involves taking some risks, not clickbait articles. She introduces herself to some scruffy-looking gentlemen offering $50 for information about Carmine Falcone. One of them pulls a switchblade, saying, "Folks ain't supposed to be getting curious just yet."
Yet? So there is a time in this big conspiracy where people are allowed to be curious? And this guy is high enough in the echelon to know that time?
Vale apparently lied about following up on the Gordon story, and for some reason Joey announces how expensive his camera is. The thug grabs Vicky's face, but is tasered from behind. After 2 small panels showing, I guess the other thugs tilting their heads awkwardly, we see their savior is none other than Harper Row, in a disguise no one would recognize her in. Harper tells the 2 idiots to follow her, as the streets have more goons that they don't want to encounter.
I know space can be an issue when composing panels in a story, but you should show the actual impact if she's attacking. If she's using her taser, show it. The panels look scrunched and awkward with little indication of how these burly street toughs are being subdued by a scrappy teenager.
Elsewhere, Red Robin has located the source of the nano swarm. It apparently has a custom language, and he commands his gauntlet to locate all nanotech in the building. This becomes a problem as the kid's eyes glow, and he speaks with an apparently computerized tone, saying the system is compromised and it must eliminate the threat. Billows of nanobots home in on Red Robin. Oh, hell.
Language! There's a child present. A possessed child, but still.
The Gazette reporters are brought to the Row apartment, because that's what any crime fighter would do. Colin and Joey go make coffee, while Harper begins railing Vicky for walking up to street thugs in the Narrows. When Vale mentions the gang war, Harper says that there are thugs taking territory and killing each other for Falcone or Penguin, despite never meeting either boss. however she knows that. How is it some 18-year-old girl is safer than me out there?
Plot convenience and writer favoritism. But it's true. On a side note, it's worth mentioning that Harper just said that goons in the Narrows never met either Penguin or Falcone, yet that one goon from before mentioned not being curious yet. Seemed like he was in on the big plan to some capacity. Or do we assume he's been told through some kind of criminal grapevine?
Ro plays up her tricked-out tasers and says Vicky should forget her face, since Harper saved her life. Cue ironic twist when the goons she so deftly incapacitated before break her door down. And just when the coffee was ready. Never fear, Red Robin crashes through the ceiling as he fights the nanoswarm. The goons open up on the swarm, and they become the new threat. As the nanobots attack, Red Robin gets Rose and the reporters out of the room, though not very far. He has an awkward exchange with Joey, who mentions having a picture of RR on his wall. I guess that was meant to be funny. Red R tries out a command to make the swarm go dormant, and with the goons incapacitated, they retreat into a form that looks like a cocoon of tendrils. Joey says there's something wrong with Cullen. I don't know what he's talking about. His eyes glow, a dialogue bubble acknowledges a command registered, and the entire swarm goes from floating cocoon to Cullen's face before anyone can react. Seems pretty normal to me. Cullen falls to the ground, unresponsive to Harper's cries, and Red Robin has already contacted emergency services.
I'm sure, like any impoverished neighborhood, an ambulance will be there promptly, and it wouldn't be easier to simply carry him to the nearest hospital in a red wagon.
As Harper blames Red Robin for this, Vicky grabs one of her tasers and wakes one of the goons up with it. She presses the guy against a wall, taser to his face, reintroduces herself, and asks for some answers. The issue ends in Tokyo, where a man is reading the Gotham Gazette headline mentioning the gang war. So not only did Vicky manage to get this street tough to talk, it must be some ambiguous amount of time later. The bearded man tells his cyborg monkey Maxwell that the nanites were activated ahead of time, and then mentions that he trained young Mr. Wayne.
This story has a lot of problems in just a few issues. But I gotta give points for the Cyborg Monkey.
Issue 6, scripted by Ray Fawkes, sees a relative new Mythos edition, Batwing, in an abandoned truck yard tussling with Gentleman Ghost. Although threatening to scoop the brains out of his head doesn't sound particularly gentlemanly, Batwing crashes to the ground and is saved by a batarang passing through the spectral foe, causing him to disappear. Batman slinks out of the shadows, catching his batarang, and they exchange information. Batwing confirms the weapons Falcone is hiding in the truck yard: anti-personnel, anti-tank, incendiary, and the like. The ghost thing just never showed up in his sensors. Bat says he relies on them too much.
Oh, you are hardly one to talk, Bruce. This character has been so heavily reliant on technology, especially in recent years. This is so hypocritical. He's all holographic projections and in-cowl scanners and the like.
He explains that Gentleman Ghost is just that, a ghost, and for reasons he doesn't fully understand, nth metal is a weakness that'll keep him at bay until the next new moon.
Nth metal also works on his cousin, Appalachian Ghost, but he comes back every time someone plays Blue Moon over Kentucky.
As Batman suggests rigging the trucks for both sabotage and tracking, Batwing seems a little confused by all the ghost talk. Bats tells him in this city he has to be ready to believe what a purely rational mind would deny, lest it fall prey to creatures that draw strength from such denial. We cut to Batman Beyond villain Blight, Dr. Phosphorus, in what looks like the sewers beneath Arkham Asylum. Just, strolling, minding his own business.
Raindrops keep falling on my head. Then the streets of Gotham will soon run bloody red. La 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 la.
Arriving in the Batcave, Bruce is informed by Alfred that he has a visitor in the library, and we get an indication that Alfred is a bit uncomfortable with mystics. I don't like what happens to all the mirrors when he's here.
You mean writing limworks on them with soap? Well, who do you think has to clean them afterwards?
Bruce is in his civvies when he greets Jim Corrigan, who's already made himself at home, and mentions off the cuff the Specter told him he was Batman a while ago. For the entity of God's vengeance, he sure is a gossip, isn't he? Anyway, Corrigan sensed some magic shenanigans that pointed to Arkham Asylum, and the gang war seemed too well timed to feed that magic to be a coincidence. Bruce can't split his attention, but says he'll send some assistance, someone whom Corrigan hopes has a strong mind and stomach.
Don't read from your screenplays again, Corrigan. Tim still has nightmares about your avant-garde take on a Cheers reboot.
At Arkham, a patient nervously follows his doctor, talking about nightmares, visions of a dark maze with a million handprints and something horrible in the middle that makes him wake up screaming. The pair head underground, where we see a one-armed man making handprints on the wall and a pair of women, one dressed as a nurse, beside Maxie Zeus. The man in the white coat reveals he isn't a doctor and that Martin, the nervous patient, was injected with something to keep him from disobeying. Marty's detailed experience of the dark dream means he may have talent, so is forced further onward to meet Her Highness, Joker's daughter, with various severed arms around her. She says that for a summoning to bring the man back, Martin should be sent into the maze. He may come back interesting. This is how they reinvent her to be edgy and modern, wearing Joker's amputated face and surrounded by body parts. This is sadder than the extreme craze of the 1990s. Blech. We head to the apartment of Luke Fox, Batwing's alter ego, as he tries to customize a GPS signal on his phone. His roommate, I guess? I could have spared one narrative caption to explain who this guy is. He's recalling some stuff from when Luke was a kid when an explosion calls their attention. Batman calls, confirming it was from Cathedral Square, to say he'll investigate the detonation. Batwing is going to meet at Rendezvous 6 Alpha to meet a friend.
Santa Claus?
Nope. When he gets to Arkham Asylum, he meets Jim Corrigan, who explains there's a summoning somewhere nearby and magically shields Batwing, which is somehow breaking some rules that are never explained. B-Wing mentions that Bats talked about a divine spirit and that it must have been a figure of speech, not meaning it literally. Corrigan generates some magic sigils, adding, "No, he did. Totally literally." Lastly, Batwing was told to run if Corrigan starts smoking out the eyes and mouth, because he won't want to watch what happens next. On a splash page that looks cool but seems pretty fillery, Corrigan says the basics seem covered and asks his new partner if he's ready.
Nice try, but I've heard about your screenplays.
Batman races to the cafe where the explosion has resulted in dozens of casualties. Alfred, wiping fog from mirrors, tells him fire crews are headed to an old Gotham medical facility on napalm protocol, and one of the trucks Batman tagged earlier is in the area. In lieu of sleep, Batman is going after it. Alfred's concerned that Bats is straining himself, but the Dark Knight doesn't want things escalating while Forbes keeps the police at bay. Phosphorus is seen surrounded by flammable material, and as Bats closes in on a red semi-truck, Phosphorus ignites the barrels, and an explosion engulfs the truck before Batman's eyes.
Optimus Prime! No!
Tune in next week as the review continues. Hey, don't blame me, I didn't make it 52 issues.